As a part of that book, I'm sure you have more reasons as to why determinism is false. Are there any that kind of stick out to you that you feel like are really strong at this moment?
Well, besides the science, there's two or three, but for lack of time, the one I would pick is that determinism is self-contradictory. Determinist principles, violate their own terms, their contradictions. And the easiest way to, I think, to get into this is to take a very popular criticism of postmodernist thought and show you how it's a contradiction. So postmodernism, right, various forms, in one way or another say there is no truth. Truth is a power play or a means of gaining power, or means of manipulation. And all kinds of critics jump up in their seats and say, wait a second, how can it be true that there's no truth? You are telling us something that you are claiming that's true. You're making a truth claim. But on the other hand, you're saying that there's no truth. That invalidates your ability to make a truth claim about anything. So it's an inherent contradiction. In saying there is no truth, you have to say something is true. So it's a self-contradictory claim. It's called a performative contradiction. It's a funny, random, odd word for a simple thing, which is that certain claims you can't make. They make no sense. They contradict themselves. There is no truth, and I'm telling you that's true. Okay? Another example before we get to determinism is Thomas Nagel argues against subjective type philosophies. Everything is subjective. And he says, well, wait a second. Then what you're saying is subjective. If you want to get rid of any kind of objective measure of anything, okay, but then you've disqualified yourself from making a claim because everything you say is subjective by your own proposition. Another way, I think he says it somewhere, he says, you can't discredit reason or marginalize reason without using reason to do it. And so he doesn't call it the performative, but he uses the problem with many prominent philosophies is they contradict themselves. Well, determinism is the same. There's a fundamental contradiction at the heart of determinism. Determinism is true. Oh, but I believe determinism is true because unthinking causal events forced me to believe it. Determinism is true, but I believe it because I was caused to believe it. So a determinist world is a world in which there is no truth. Our thoughts are attributable to physical forces, not to truth. There is no objective truth. Objective truth in a determinist universe is whatever we're causally compelled to believe is objective. So, like postmodernism, determinism is making a fundamentally contradictory and self-invalidating claim. It's saying all of our thoughts are determined. That means all of our thoughts are based on truth. Well, wait a second. That's wrong. That's not right. Well, if you're a determinist saying that, you have to say back to them, well, that was just another determined thought you're thinking. Okay, so what? Still not based on truth. And if a determinist says, well, wait a second, maybe the world was set up so that what I'm caused to believe true happens to correspond to what's true. Okay, that's according to determinism, your determinism, that's what you're determined to believe. Fine, you can believe that. So determinist claims are nonsensical. I listened to Sapolsky last night give a lecture. He seems like such a nice guy, and he's so knowledgeable, and he's got such great lectures out there on, evolutionary biology. They're just fantastic. But I hear him say these things on the free will debate about, well, we don't determine anything. We don't determine. Well, it's all our neurons and our this and that. And I go, well, then, Robert, my chum, that means that all those things just prompted you to say that. So why should I believe you? Noam Chomsky has a good way of saying the performative contradiction that I quoted in the book. And this is a very loose paraphrase of the contradiction at the heart of determinist principles. He says something like, if you really believe in determinism, why are you up there trying to convince people the world is determined? You can't convince them. Their thoughts have already been determined. You don't have reason at your disposal because what you think is reasonable is what causal forces have made you think is reasonable. So what are you doing up there? Why don't you go see he says, why don't you go see a ball game?